Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give it just a minute or so for everyone to hop on. And we initially turned off the mics for everyone. I'm going to each person to turn on their mic. We definitely want to keep this as interactive as possible. So throughout the webinar, if you want to submit your questions through chat or just raise your hand and unmute yourself, feel free to do so. Thanks for joining. Hello, hello. We're going to get started in a little bit here. Yeah, while we're waiting, we'd love to hear where everyone's joining from. Feel free to drop your location in the chat. South Minneapolis, welcome, Chris. Atlanta, welcome. I'm sure the weather's much nicer there. We just got a snowstorm up here in Minnesota. It was our worst snowstorm so far this year. So would love to be in Atlanta right now.
Wet and heavy. Everybody out shoveling has a sore back today.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it was a great workout. Hello, we're going to get started in just a little bit here. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. I'm Marcelo Monteagudo, the head of sales at Impact Group, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. Next slide. Today's session is for anyone in an organization that's either going through a transformation, considering one, or simply looking to stay ahead of the curve. Before we dive into the content, I'd like to take a moment to just give a brief overview of who we are at Impact Group for those who might be unfamiliar with us. After that, I'll hand it over to our main presenters, John Beck and Tom Harmon. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. However, please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar by submitting them through chat or raising your hand and unmuting yourself. We definitely want to keep this as interactive as possible. Next slide, please. Impact Group is a management. Oh, no, this is the right slide. So this is great. So Impact Group is a management and technology consulting firm based in Oakdale, Minnesota. We've been around for over 30 years, and we've led everything from multi-year business and digital transformations to IT and cloud strategy to ERP and enterprise application implementations, upgrades, and integrations, whether it's SAP, Oracle, NetSuite, or our recently launched Microsoft Dynamics 365 practice. The other side of Impact Group provides technology services, including managed services, service desk, and cybersecurity. We have some of the best technical problem solvers in the business. So between our consulting and technology services, we act as a single point of contact for many organizations' IT and technology needs. Next slide. There you go. Here's a snapshot of the clients we work with. We partner with a wide range of organizations from startups to the Fortune 500, from private to public companies to government entities. Our reach spans nearly every major industry sector. Next slide, please. We've delivered a wide variety of solutions from AI tool implementations to PMO assessments to ERP integrations. Each solution is tailored to meet the unique needs of our clients. Today, we're focusing on enterprise program leadership, or as we'll be calling throughout the webinar, EPL, and the critical role it plays in large-scale initiatives from ERP implementations to broader digital transformations. So you might be wondering what's the difference between an ERP implementation and a digital transformation. A digital transformation typically involves a broader scope, often rethinking the entire business model, while an ERP or enterprise application may be a subset of that transformation. Digital transformations may include advanced technologies such as AI, Internet of Things, machine sensors, smart manufacturing, and cloud computing, whereas ERP focus on improving business processes through just a specific application. And we'll get deeper into these differences later on in the session. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to introduce our main presenters, John Beck and Tom Harmon. John is a senior management consultant with a proven track record in driving business and digital transformations, leveraging enterprise class applications. Tom's career spans more than 25 years, including more than 15 years as an independent consultant. He's led transformation programs and projects underpinned by ERP, CRM, and PIM implementations. He's skilled at helping organizations turn what may initially seem to be ambiguously defined opportunities into measurable results through actionable plans and expert program and project management. With that, John, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Marcelo. So the first thing we want to do is kind of level set on a digital transformation involving enterprise class software. So Marcelo sort of did a comparison of ERP implementations versus digital transformations. We're going to talk about digital transformations with enterprise class software. And what does that mean? So first thing it means is that it has a best business practice built into it, right? So you see some process areas, right? Order to cash, procure to pay, right? So an enterprise class software can have one or more of those broad business processes built into it, right? The other thing about enterprise class software is that it impacts multiple functions within an organization. So if I use some acronyms, ERP might impact every function in an organization. CRM might impact sales and marketing, but it's also going to touch on engineering, those sorts of other kinds of functions within the organization. Enterprise class software also handles multiple sales channels, right? Whether it be direct sales, e-commerce or web stores, indirect sales through a partner, retail subscriptions, right? It handles those multiple channels that an organization might find itself in or find itself in sometime in the future. So there's room for growth. And there are a lot of acronyms and brands around that are really, in our opinion, enterprise class software, right? So we already talked about two of them, ERP, CRM, but CPQ, WMS, PLM, those are other acronyms that might fit into a transformation involving enterprise class software. And then some of the brand names we've all heard, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft with their D365 product or their Business Central product, Infor with all the brand names that it has, Salesforce, and down the line.
So John talked about what is enterprise class software. Just talk a minute about what is digital transformation. And many of you might be in the middle of a transformation now or contemplating one, but at its core, it's using digital technology to change an organization's business processes, its customer experience, its culture even. And so you're essentially reimagining the way you do business. And there's a lot of components to that. And this is where we start to talk about, why you really are going to want to have some enterprise program leadership helping you drive that transformation, because it can be, a holistic shift. There's going to be some dramatic change, and it's going to reach beyond your organization to your customers, to your vendors, banking relationships, etc. So you really want to think about, as you're starting to think about getting into a digital transformation, who do we have on our team that can be that EPL or that enterprise program leader? You want to flip to the next slide, John? And so as things have matured, we talk about implementation versus transformation. And so in an ERP implementation, you might think about people, process, and technology. We've probably all heard that triad. But when we're talking about a digital transformation, we really got to kind of dig down into some of these other pillars. So we're really thinking about the customer experience and thinking about enhancing that experience for them, customizing their experience. And we need to think about operational agility. So how can we work more efficiently? How can we be more flexible? How can we scale? And then from a workforce perspective, we want to enable that workforce. We want to focus on collaboration, focus on innovation, and then bringing up that level of digital literacy within our workforce. And of course, there's the enterprise class software pillar John introduced previously. We want to make sure that we've got software that's scalable, it's robust, it's reliable, etc. And so you're going to need, again, you're going to want to have enterprise program leadership to help you navigate that journey. So who contributes to the digital transformation? So obviously you as a client obviously have a big role. You're going to have a software vendor, maybe more, system integrator, and then your enterprise program leader. So as a client, of course, you're helping to define the vision. You're going to need to provide resources to contribute to that transformation, assure the alignment with the objectives, etc. The software vendor obviously is bringing their software. They're going to provide training and support. Other thing that they're going to do, you're going to want to select your software vendor and to make sure that there's someone that are going to be keeping up with that particular platform and bringing the new features and functions that need to come with a changing environment. And then the system integrator. So their primary purpose is to assure that everything works together seamlessly. They are going to bring the functional consultants and the developers who are going to implement and configure. They're going to help you with test and troubleshoot, and support and maintain it. And so, I mean, some of these things may overlap a bit. Again, another reason why you're going to want, an EPL to kind of help navigate those responsibilities and set those responsibilities early in the transformation so people know what they're responsible for. Other things, the EPL will help the client ensure that they've got the right people and the team and the priorities in place. The last thing I think that's important here is that system integrator, that they have their own competing priorities as well. They may have multiple clients, et cetera. So that's where your EPL will come into play and help navigate, and manage any conflicting priorities. I'm gonna move it. There you go.
So the thing about digital transformation, from our perspective, is that it's certainly a point in time where you decide we're going to kick off the digital transformation, but you have to keep in mind, we think, all of the preparation that has to go into kicking off a digital transformation, right? And even, for example, if you're on a current piece of software, maybe that's an older version of it, right? And the organization says, well, we don't want to change anything. We just want to upgrade to the newest version, right? But it's been like 5-6 years since we've done that, right? Well, you think of it this way, right? You're on a dated piece of software technology, right? And the vendor has moved on with its functionality, right? So you're going to have to flex some of your business processes to move into the new world of the new version of the software, right? So you really have to do some good front end work to make sure you're ready to do that. And that starts with some sort of requirements gathering session, right? So looking at your user base, how they're using the software, where they think the software could be improved, those sorts of things. Doing a rationalization of those requirements, right? Really getting them start forming the vision of what your digital transformation is going to look like based on those requirements. And then there might be sort of some preparatory projects that you have to kick off, right? Like, you may have to do a software selection. If you're going to a new version, right, you don't want to just trust the software vendor to say, yes, this new version of the software is going to meet our requirements, right? So at a minimum, you've got to look at that new version and make sure, do some sort of validation that says, yes, this software is still suitable for our needs. And if it's not, then you have to decide, okay, we're going to continue with this version upgrade. We're going to open up our selection to a broader market. The other thing that you need to get your arms wrapped around are the business processes and how they currently work, right? So how your organization currently operates. And we find it's beneficial to do that in some sort of a process mapping exercise. We call it as is process documentation. And those processes, right, if the organization desires, right, we can take a look at how those processes might look like in a transformed organization, right? So what's the compare? How does as is versus future state look like? And then the big thing that we want to emphasize as part of the digital transformation is this whole concept of change management, right? Because we are going to be, by definition, impacting the professional lives of a lot of folks in our organizations. So we want to make sure we have dedicated change management resources assigned to the transformation, and monitoring the change as we go along and get into the process of actually executing the digital transformation. And the other thing I just want to mention real quickly, you see a little graphic down in the lower right-hand corner of these slides from this point forward. So Tom introduced us to the players in a digital transformation, and we wanted to highlight for you folks, how the different players impact where we're at in terms of a point in time within the digital transformation. The next thing we wanted to talk about is, understanding where you're at in the process journey, because what we find is a lot of organizations, if they haven't gone too far in their process journey, right, they want to use the transformation to step up their game, if you will, right? So it's really important that you understand where you're at in the process journey, because think of it this way. If you're a startup company, right, you really don't have any process defined yet, right? You're just reactive, right? Customer calls, a vendor calls, we've got a problem, right? The entire organization sort of mobilizes because they're small enough to fix that issue. But as you grow, right, you have to start adding some structure to your business, right? Typically, that starts manifesting itself as standard operating procedures, or maybe you've started a quality program, right? So you're adding structure to the organization, so that you can reasonably predict when this thing happens, like an issue comes up for a particular customer, you have ways of addressing those issues. To get into the real part of the transformation, though, you really need to start looking at processes more holistically, like Tom mentioned, and how you're going to operate in the future. And that's where you get into making processes predictable, and eventually you're going to want to move into the optimization, right, where you're always sort of self-correcting. If you live in an agile world, right, you're doing a bunch of sprints continuously to always improve your process effectiveness. In terms of if we look at a single process as just a microcosm of what the transformation does, right? The processes have to go through sort of a life cycle of their own, right? So you first start and look at processes so that you eliminate redundancies. Then you look to reduce errors. Then you look for automation. Then you look to simplify and improve resource allocation, right? So you have to take each of those processes through its own life cycle to get to that point where you're at the optimization phase. And the other thing you'll notice here is that we've started circling some of the things where we think AI is going to become important, where it's going to manifest itself, right? So within a particular process area, right, the first thing AI can do is start helping to reduce errors, right? It can do some of the mundane tasks that perhaps people do today. And, because people do it, errors come into the data, right? So you can start leveraging AI at various points in the organization. It's very important that we think it's very important that you understand where you can bring AI to bear for the most benefit. And then finally, if you think about AI and how it might impact your organization or a transformation in general, right? It really can impact a lot across the organization, right? If we start at the left-hand side, right? So let's take a Teams meeting. We use Copilot in our Teams meetings, right? And at the end of a meeting, we tell Copilot to generate a meeting summary. And it's a really cool thing, right? Copilot does a great job of saying who said what the action items were that were decided on, who those action items were assigned to. So AI is really kind of a game changer for us in terms of how we approach our consulting. And then if you look at the other parts of the process puzzle, right, you can kind of just go down the line. If you look at sales and marketing, right, you can leverage AI instead of maybe an inbound sales process or a call center, right? AI chatbots can fix a lot of problems with orders and things like that sort of automagically, right? So you can really get much more effective and efficient in the way that you're delivering your processes to your customers and for your vendors.
So I'm going to piggyback again a little bit off some things that John introduced earlier. One of the things that you might have to do as part of your preparation for your digital transformation is, select some software, select a vendor to bring, some of the features and functions that you need for that transformation. And so, again, enterprise program leadership will come in and help you in that phase. And so some of the things that they might do are help you, define the strategy, help you underpin the transformation effort with a business plan, helping you put the project charter and the budget together. So these are all things, again, where your enterprise program leader is helping you move forward with that transformation. And then you can see a pretty common methodology for how you move through a software selection with the requirements gathering, qualifying vendors, preparing a scripted demo, getting to that final decision. And there are a number of steps and a number of players that are involved in that software selection. And again, this is where your program leader is going to help you put that mini plan together. The other thing that they're going to do, a software selection in and of itself takes time, right? It costs money. You got to have people engaged. And so one of the things the EPL will help you with at that first step with the requirements is help you figure out which of those requirements are really your critical and unique requirements. Because you're going to want to make sure that when you go through a demo with a potential vendor, that those are the things that they're demonstrating for you, that they can meet those requirements. There may be others, and those are important as well, but you want to make sure that you take the time then to take the other requirements that aren't critical and unique and make sure they're prioritized, okay? All of that then will, contribute to, whatever scoring mechanism you eventually use to help make that final decision. The other thing, that your EPL is going to do is likely help you prepare them the RFI or the RFPs that go out to those vendors. And then once you start getting feedback or starting getting information back from those potential vendors, you're going to want to narrow that list down and say, okay, here are the 2 or 3 that we want to have come in and do a demo for us. And what's really important at that point is that you provide the script. You work with your key decision makers to decide, what should that script look like? How will we know that potential software vendor can actually meet our requirements? So you want to make sure that that's scripted and that the vendors follow that script when they perform the demo. And then finally, the enterprise program leader is going to help you with that final decision making. There's different, mechanisms that you can use or methodologies you can use to make that decision, different scoring mechanisms. So that, again, is going to be a place where the EPL is, you want to make sure you've got that leadership in place to help you with the software selection. Before you jump to the next slide, just real quick, John, I want to just repoint out the infographic in the lower right that we introduced. Again, just showing, what we believe, what the level of engagement each of these key stakeholder groups would have in these processes. One thing you'll notice as you go through here that your program leader is going to be highly engaged in most of these activities throughout your transformation from beginning to end. You want to go? There you go.
So let's talk a bit about change management, right? So change management is just super critical, very important. You probably heard it 100 times, right? But you really have to think about that holistic change and the impact that it's going to have on the people in your organization, right? So you have to prepare for the change, right? Make change management really part and parcel of the transformation plan for it. And keep in mind that change management is not an event, right? It's not training. It is a cultural shift. So as are looking at the processes and how the processes are going to change for the entire organization, right? How are we going to sort of define what that change looks like, how we're going to make sure people are changing as we need them to, those sorts of things. And we find it's best to assign specific resources to the change management work. You have to manage and monitor the change, right? So you must have a change management plan, we believe, to have an effective digital transformation. You have to assess and understand your current state of your SOPs and training materials, and then develop some change KPIs. And this is another place where AI is going to be very helpful. Is it can look across things like documents that the transformation is generating, right? And start getting a feel for what's the change impact and how are we doing relative to that change impact? Are we starting to change as an organization to adopt these new ways of doing business? You have to reinforce the change, right? And you have to keep in mind, we believe, the way adults learn, right? And adults learn best when their training has some relevance and purpose to their task at hand, so their professional daily lives, right? So you have to structure the training using real transactions from the organization, right? It can't be a standard test deck, something like that. It's got to be real transactions from your business, and how they will work in this new digitally transformed environment. We found that using some sort of a self-guided training tool is very helpful in affecting change management across an organization. And by that, I mean like a content management system or a learning management system, right? Where you can create the training online, and then you can monitor as the organization starts consuming that training, how people are doing with the training, whether they're making process, whether they're having to go back, look at previous modules before they can proceed, those sorts of things, so that we're always able to sort of tweak the way that the change is happening in the organization. And then if we do need one-on-one training, because we still do that, right? Just focus on problems that they're trying to solve, right? Not trying to convince them to use something, just saying, what are you trying to accomplish, and helping them understand this is the way that they're going to accomplish getting that task done. And then the other thing that we think is very important is to consider change management as it relates to unit testing, user acceptance testing, and system integration testing as we're deploying this new enterprise class software in the organization, right? So really look at how is this going to help us change with using the software as the excuse to change.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about things that independent enterprise program leadership will bring to your transformation effort. So one of the things I'm going to do as independent enterprise program leader is make sure that we've got the right principles in place. So we'll talk a little bit about a handful of these. We talked a little bit before about having a clear vision, and the things that underpin that clear vision. So you want to make sure that you've got a strategy. Got to make sure that you've prepared your project charter and your business case. Again, EPL will help you with that. When we talk about a communication plan, I'm sure many of you have prepared a communication plan. One of the key things I think that's important here is to ensure that you understand what the criteria is going to be for decision making. So when as you progress through a transformation, you'll find some of the resistance will come from folks that want to perhaps replicate the current system, and that might not be where you're headed with that transformation. And so having solid criteria in place to help guide that decision making will smooth that out. Again, you want to make sure that you've got the right team in place. And so again, your enterprise program leader will help you figure out, what are the roles that need to participate, what will be the responsibility of those roles, help you evaluate team members within your own organization and whether they, are going to be the right people to assign. Other things that you need to navigate there around, oftentimes you're going to find that you're going to need to have fully engaged people in the transformation. And so you need to think about things like backfill, and the EPL can help you figure out, which of those roles will likely need some backfill to operations so that those people can contribute, 100% to that transformation. I want to talk about budget. So you're obviously going to get numbers, you're going to get information, input about the budget from your software vendor, from your system integrators or VARs, but you need to think of that as table stakes. There are other things that the enterprise program leader will help make sure that you think about and get incorporated into the budget. So things like working with third parties. So you may have third parties that might be impacted by your transformation, and they may not even have changes to make per se on their side from a system perspective, but you may need to engage them for things like testing. And so you need to think about whether there's going to be some cost implication from that. So obviously you're going to want some independent program leadership to help you sort out where those other ancillary budget items might lie and make sure that those are incorporated as well, so they don't, surprise you later in the transformation. And then just again, as always, risk management is extremely important in the transformation. These are the kinds of things that enterprise program leaders do every day, helping you identify where you may have risks, figuring out, assessing those, how likely do they occur, what would the impact be if they occurred, helping you decide whether or not they can be mitigated and the best way to mitigate those risks. So again, lots of things. It's these leadership principles that the EPL brings to help, ensure the success of your transformation. And then the other thing is think about methodology. So hybrid, agile, waterfall, they're all solid methodologies. They all have their place. You're going to want, someone to help you figure out what's the right methodology for our transformation. And in the case where you might be, if that transformation includes like a CRM or an ERP re-implementation or implementation, you're going to want, some help in that regard. Making sure that the methodology that your system integrator or VAR brings, fits your structure and your culture. So just an example, they'll all bring a methodology, and you should trust it. That's part of what you're paying those people for, but you want to make sure that it fits. And so, for example, worked on a program where we had an integrator that brought in a methodology. It was a solid methodology, but it didn't completely incorporate into downstream testing processes that weren't directly touched by that transformation. But it was important to make sure that those things fit after the transformation. So they needed to be incorporated into the methodologies. That's one of the things that we did working with that system integrator, is making sure that that was there. So again, I talked about fitting with the culture and the structure. And then the other thing is, ensuring that, progress reporting underpins the overall timeline. So one of the things here you'll find in many cases, you'll be working in a hybrid mode. You generally have a high level timeline, but you also may have, a very detailed work management system. So you've got very detailed work objects, tasks, test plans, test scripts, and things in a work management system such as Azure DevOps or Jira or something like that. But oftentimes you'll find that while working, in an agile way, you can see progress, on a daily basis at a very detailed level. Sometimes it's very hard to see the critical path in that work management system. So one of the things that enterprise program leader can do is kind of help bridge between that day-to-day agile work management and the high level timeline to help to, try to assess, that we're making progress as we should, or if it looks like we might be falling behind, identify where those risks are and help kind of mitigate those. And so, again, another place where, your enterprise program leader is going to help you, with the success of the transformation. I was going to add, we do find that in large transformations, especially ones that involve like an ERP upgrade or implementation, that you do often work in a hybrid mode. So things at the very front end, like high level requirements gathering and design, tend to be time boxed activities. And then when you get into the detailed design and construction, that's an area that really fits well with an agile kind of mode. Again, working in like an ADO or a Jira. And then generally, though, that phase is followed by your mock deployments and your system integration testing and your UAT. Those things tend to be, again, time boxed in nature. And then lastly, talk a little bit about, providing that independent governance and risk management, preparing yourself for the unknowns. The key point I would make here is, as an independent enterprise program leader, we are beholden to the client, right? We don't have any other conflicting priorities. I talked about earlier, your system integrator, your VAR, is going to, make sure that things work seamlessly. They're going to bring the developers, they're going to bring the functional consultants, but they generally, they all have their own priorities to manage as well. And so this is where your enterprise program leader is important to help work on your behalf. And the example I would give is your system integrators generally are working with more than one client. They have I won't say a bench, there's not many benches anymore, but they have their group of consultants, and they need to decide where those are going to be applied, right? And so I've found that sometimes the system integrator isn't always looking, across their regions to ensure that, the client is getting maybe the best resource. And so, as an enterprise program leader, we've been involved to kind of work with them and negotiate that and say, hey, could you please, look beyond the Midwest to see if you can find the right sales and marketing functional consultant, right? And so those are the kinds of things why it's important to have that independent enterprise program leadership in place. The last thing I would say here is, the EPL is going to look beyond what the system integrator or the VAR provides. So they're going to be helping ensure that the OCM is getting integrated with the transformation and the plan. They're going to be working with other third parties and managing those relationships and making sure that they're on board and can meet the timelines that are in place, et cetera. So lots of different reasons why you really want to have some independent enterprise program leadership to help guide your transformation and ensure that it's successful.
And the last thing we wanted to talk about was, what things get digital transformations off track, right? So the first thing is an organization decides not to use the built-in best business practice, right? So we talked about the enterprise class software has best practice for order to cash, right? And the organization says, you know what? And we've all experienced it on the impact group side, right? The client says, the way we do it today, we think is world class. We cannot get better than that. We absolutely have to have this process manifested itself in the software. And the problem with that is that leads to customizations, right? And once you start customizing the software, it's a slippery slope, right? Once you start customizing, then the organization says, well, we customized it here, we might as well customize it there, right? And you really need to manage that tendency to customize versus flex your process to match the best business practice built in. Did I see a hand go up or?
I think there were
Right.
hands clapping. So
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Cool. Thank you. Yes. The other thing that gets digital transformations off track is data conversion. Um, you know, data conversion is just difficult, right? And software vendors, VARs, have a tendency to gloss over the scope and magnitude of data conversion, even if you're staying within the same vendor. So you're coming off of an earlier version, moving on to a new version of the same vendor's software. Data conversion can turn into a nightmare. The other thing that the VAR and SI don't necessarily know about are all of the Excel spreadsheets that your organization has today that they use as a check and balance on that core, enterprise class application that you're currently using, right? So you need to take all of those Excel spreadsheets into account when you're looking at data conversion, because you will have multiple sources of truly data that is the source of truth. The other thing that can get a digital transformation off track is if the executive team merely gives it lip service, right? That is, they're not actively participating in the transformation itself. There are literally thousands of decisions that are going to be made as part of a transformation, and executive leadership needs to be comfortable with the people that they've empowered to make those decisions. And if they're not comfortable, they have to make the decisions themselves, right? So executive leadership really has to truly participate in the transformation process. Next thing that can happen is miscommunication. It happens all the time, right? But that's where the communication plan comes into play, right? Making sure we understand if we have a miscommunication, how do we fix it? How do we get the parties on into a meeting and clear up any misunderstandings that have happened, and just move on, right? Let it be. We fixed it. Let's move on. Another reason why digital transformations get off track is the lack of the change management focus. Or what we find happens is that as we get into those time boxed parts of the implementation, the transformation that Tom talked about, right? We start shortchanging change management, right? Oh, we can just compress the amount of training time that we have in our project plan because we're going over budget in UAT or SIT, right? And that's where transformations can really get off track, because we're literally not leaving our people enough time to sort of consider the transformation, what it's going to do to their jobs, and then accepting the transformation down the road. And finally, understanding the complexity, and where that complexity comes in is that, think about your company's current operating paradigm, right? Not only do you have one, I'll call it core application, and maybe you call that core application your ERP application or something like that, right? You've got a bunch of other applications that are sitting around that core application, right? Maybe if you're a manufacturer or distributor, you're using EDI to communicate with your vendors, right? We have to take EDI into account as part of your transformation. Maybe you've got an outside payroll service, right? So you need to make sure you're taking in, how are we going to integrate these other point solutions that may or may not be going away with the transformation into account.
John,
So
next
Marcel,
slide.
oh, sorry.
Okay, well, thank you, John and Tom, for that insightful presentation. I'm sure everyone now has a much clearer understanding of the critical role that enterprise program leadership, or EPL, plays in the success of large-scale initiatives. We're now going to open up the floor for our Q&A session. Feel free to submit your questions through chat, or go ahead and unmute yourself. And if we don't get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you individually after the session. And while we give some time for people to think of questions, I'll kick things off with the first question to John and Tom. Can you provide examples of successful enterprise class projects and the strategies used to achieve their goals?
Sure. You want me to start that one, John?
Yeah,
You
go ahead,
pitch in.
Tom.
So John and I have been independent for a number of years, but we've had the good fortune of working on 2 or 3 of the same projects together over the last 5 or 6 years. A relatively recent one, we were working with a large US retailer. The project was all around omni-channel. It had I think one of the things that held it together, or the strategies that helped it be successful, is just making sure we had the right vision in place and everybody knew what that was about. So this was about, again, improving the customer experience across all the channels. So whether they were buying online, or whether they were visiting a physical store, whether they had some contact with the contact center. So we wanted to make sure that we're improving the experience for the customer. At the same time, for the retail, or for the retailer themselves, trying to improve that 360-degree view of the customer, right? So in one place, we could see all the engagement that we were having with any particular customer. So the vision was an important strategy. I think another important strategy was, again, making sure that we had full-time, dedicated, committed, what we called work stream leads. You might call them value stream leads, but having those people fully committed was an important strategy. And in I shouldn't say many cases, I'm going to say more than 75% of cases, those people that were fully committed then, were backfilled in their operational role. So that was a key strategy, I think, that made that successful. The other thing I think that we did was just obviously having a program leader in place, and that program leader making sure that we had the cross-project collaboration going on. So a couple of the key large projects that were part of that transformation were replatforming, upgrading e-commerce system, at the same time replacing point of sale in all of the physical stores. So 2 really large parallel projects that had some interdependencies. So having a program leader in place that could manage the cross collaboration, and just a good example of that, one of the key characteristics of any retailer these days is having the concept of buy online, pick up in store, right? So you've got a transaction that's starting online and finishing in the store. And so there's a lot of cross-project testing that needed to be coordinated. So it was that collaboration and that cross-project planning that I think was another key strategy to the success of that transformation.
Yeah, and just I would just say, Tom, the management of the deadlines and the due dates, right? And right, because we had the web the website reimagination, right?
Yep.
And we had to call the ball every once in a while. Hey, we're going to let this part of the project, whether it's the retail POS part of the project or the web project, set the tone and tenor for the rest of the project. And that actually changed throughout the project, right? So as the web team was making progress, right? Maybe the POS team was falling behind a little bit in there. So we just had to make sure we're already always syncing those 2 up, because they really did need to go live at close to the same time, right? Because of that BOPUS channel, right? That
Exactly.
buy online, pick up in store, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you for that example. And if I don't see any other questions, I'll go ahead and ask another one here. So John and Tom, how do you measure the success of a digital transformation?
I'll kind of lead off, and John, you can kind of pickyback again.
Okay.
Well, it depends on the transformation, I think. So it begins with picking the right KPIs and metrics, right? And so again, depending on the transformation, you would choose the right KPIs. I'll give an example. As part of our OmniConnect program, again, one of the things we wanted to improve the customer experience, right? And so one of the key metrics that we chose, or KPIs, was something called Net Promoter Score. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that, but it's a way to collect customer information and gather feedback about how successful that retailer is being with that customer experience. So it starts with choosing the right KPIs and metrics to that you want to go out and then collect and evaluate.
Yep, and I would just add, Tom, right? I call them big hairy goals, right? But it really is putting a metric around something that everybody can understand. So, for example, right, for that client that Tom and I have been talking about, right? One of the project objectives was just to replace a very outdated point of sale system in the stores, right? So it was something very tangible we could all see happening, but we decided, right, this project will be a success if we simply replace what we currently have with new technologies in the store, right? And that really, I think, allowed the people in the organization to coalesce around we're just replacing some hardware, right? We can deal with the process changes, things like that, because we all know that we hate this current point of sale system, right? And we want to get into something better. So you can keep those KPIs and objectives, fairly simple and straightforward, but make sure the organization can understand them.
Yeah, that's great. Once again, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions.
No, this is Chris. I've been there with that customization quagmire. And really, from my perspective, it's around when sort of the leadership decision-making group really backs away from that commitment. I've basically just said, hey, this is what this will mean. But, when you get overruled like that, what kind of strategies maybe have you used in the past to try to change that and redirect towards, no, we really should look at our process rather than trying to fit everything into what's been currently done. I mean, I won battles, we got the list down, that kind of stuff, but
Right.
I don't know, just thought I'd throw it out there as something, maybe some additional strategies.
Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack, right? When we and this SI and everybody is preaching, right, best business practice, we need to flex our process, and an executive comes in and says, nope, I agree with my people, we need to do a customization, right? That's a tough situation to be in. Personally, I think it goes back to, right, making sure when you start the program that you clearly communicate early and often to the executive team, hey, this is what happens if you come in, if you're just going to be a helicopter kind of executive on this transformation, and you're not going to participate, really in the sort of the day-to-day, or maybe the week-to-week or month-to-month, right? You've got to participate in it so that we don't get, I'll call it blindsided, right? By a decision that the executive level makes that we just weren't trending towards in the transformation team. So if that makes sense, or Tom, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I was going to say, I just kind of echo one of the points I made earlier in the discussion is up front when you're putting your communication plan together, et cetera, and your governance for the transformation, understanding what the criteria is going to be for decision making, right? And so one of those key criteria, in my opinion, ought to be, when it comes to a discussion about use out of the box or customize, I think you have to start with what's the output that needs to be achieved by that process. And if you can gain the same output out of the box, I mean, maybe that's part of the decision criteria that you ought to be using. So, I mean, that's an example of a strategy, I guess, that I would, try to employ, from the very beginning.
Yeah, gone through all that. That's fine. I mean, it's kind of a tough nut. It's you get down to it, and then they've got an emotional nope, we can't ruin this how they do it, so we're going to keep it kind of stuff. That's kind of the thing. I think I was getting at was you can set all that up front, but if it gets down to that emotional, they're on the floor, and then the whatever, and they say, we can't do this, it's going to screw everything up. And then all of a sudden it's, yep, we're going to customize.
Right.
Yeah.
I at that point, then I suppose it just comes down to just making everybody aware of what it means to the time box and timelines. So,
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. You need to be clear in that regard for sure. Yep. At
Right.
the end of the day, there is executive privilege.
yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks.
All right, great discussion. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes, John, so I'll ask another one. So what are and you may have touched on this a little bit already, what are the key governance practices that support effective digital transformation?
Tom, you can start.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, you have to understand, what structure you're going to work under. I mean, you want to put a governance team together, right? You need to understand who the key stakeholders are. Make sure that you put that structure in place. Make sure that everyone in that structure understands what their responsibilities are. So you've got your program leadership. You probably have some project management support underneath there. You've got, as I talked about, value stream leads. Everyone needs to know, where they fit in that governance structure, and then understand what their roles and responsibilities are. That's I think one of the key things. That's where I would begin. John, anything you would add to that?
The only thing I would add, Tom, is part of the governance is status reporting, right? So it is really important that the organization understand the format of the status report, and all agree on what green, yellow, red really means, right? Because the transformation can get really off track if one functional team has a definition X of green and another has a definition of Y, right? So from a governance perspective, you need to make sure everybody is always speaking the same common language as it relates to things like reporting out status. Otherwise, your status reports are going to be surprises, right? And you don't want surprises in a digital transformation.
And then I would also add, in addition to, your work management structures and things like that, you need to have, and I'm not talking OCM, but I'm talking project change management. You need to have project change management in place. So you need to have the decision makers that meet on a recurring basis to review changes that are being submitted, by the team. And again, having the appropriate decision criteria in place so that you can disposition those changes and either incorporate them or set them aside for a future transformation project. So it's that the project change management is an important part of the governance structure.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. John, feel free to move it to the next slide.
Yep, let me find my mouse.
Sure. All right, so thank you again for joining us today. We certainly want to honor your time so you can get back to your day. Our next webinar topic is on PMOs or project management offices, which is currently targeted for mid to late April. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We truly appreciate your time and engagement. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out, and we can we definitely look forward to continuing the conversation with you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.